This is the story of Gulf Air 072. It's easy to picture that night. The sun had just gone down and the lights of Bahrain were just coming on. The plane was almost at the end of its 3-hour journey and the passengers were looking forward to getting on the ground. The weather was calm, just a slight 8-knot wind, nothing too extreme. A perfect night for flying. Gulf Air's A320 descended towards Bahrain International Airport. The plane was being piloted by Captain Ihsan Shakib and co-pilot Khalaf Alawi. The captain had 4,400 flight hours and the co-pilot had 600. Today they were attempting a VOR DME non-precision approach to runway 12 at Bahrain. Usually, planes use ILS or Instrument Landing System to land. ILS includes a beacon on the threshold of the runway which blasts out a signal which the approaching plane can detect. The autopilot can then determine if the plane is too high, too low, or if it is too far off the center line. The autopilot can then maneuver the plane and get it to the threshold of the runway. The beauty of this system is that it is precise and can even work in low visibility. Contrary to this, a VOR DME approach involves the pilot tuning into a radio beacon. A needle in the cockpit now points to this needle, much like how a compass always points north. VORs are usually used for navigation, but in most situations, VOR is used to help get planes to the foot of the ILS glide slope or to the runway if the airport does not have an ILS system. As the crew talks about their day, ATC comes on and gives them clearance to maintain 3,500 feet and to navigate to runway 12 themselves. This is the most hectic part of any flight, the part where you put a multi-ton airplane traveling at hundreds of miles an hour safely on the ground. They are currently 7 nautical miles from the airport, but there's a problem. Before they can land, they have to satisfy the final approach fix or FAF conditions. For this approach, they have to be on the VOR radial 301, which they were, but all other parameters were far from normal. The speed was 233 knots instead of 136. Flaps were 1 instead of full. The altitude was 1662 feet instead of 1500. Standard operating procedure states that the airplane had to be fully configured for landing before it reaches the FAF point. This crew was woefully underprepared. The approach was beginning to unravel before they had even started the approach. To put things in perspective, the standard operating procedures allow you a leeway of 10 knots or 100 feet on this approach. Even with things as bad as they are, the captain decides to go ahead with the approach. The captain knows that he has to get the airplane stabilized before he hits 500 feet. As he pulls the speed breaker to get the plane to slow down, he tells his co-pilot, visual with airfield, they had their destination in sight. Despite the captain's best effort, the plane was not stabilized at 500 feet. It was still going way too fast to make a safe landing. The captain exclaims, "We're not going to make it," and asks the co-pilot to tell ATC that they were declaring a missed approach. The captain pushes the engines to max and the plane roared to life as the twin engines spooled up to maximum power. Usually with a missed approach, the pilot has to start the approach all over again, stabilize the airplane, find the runway, line up, and land. But Captain Ihsan opted for a 360 or an orbit. As the name suggests, they planned to circle as they lost speed and altitude. This, as the accident report put it, was non-standard operating procedure. The airplane pulled out at 0.9 nautical miles from the runway. It began its left turn to loop back to runway 12. The orbit was hand-flown as the plane was turning. The captain called for flaps 3 and then full flaps. Flaps are only fully extended when the plane is about to land as it generates too much drag. With the plane in a left turn and the flaps at full, the plane has now become harder to handle. Flaps are not meant to be used this way. This particular left turn takes the airplane over the sea. Being dark outside, the captain has to use his instruments to keep the plane level and pointed in the right direction. The captain banked too sharply and the first officer failed to monitor the situation. But during the entire turn, the first officer made no callouts. During this orbit, the altitude of the plane varied from 965 to 332 feet. Strangely enough, the captain levels out the wings 3/4 of the way through the turn, only after completing 270 degrees instead of the 360 degrees. The captain never gave an explanation as to why he leveled the wings so early, but in doing so, the plane flew through the extended center line of the runway, an imaginary line that is drawn from the center line of the runway. He lost his chance to position the airplane for landing. The situation is not improving. The first officer has sight of the airport again, even though they cannot make the landing. The captain responds with, "We overshot it," and begins a left turn as they radio the tower for another go-around. The captain's left stern gets steeper and steeper, eventually reaching 13.7 degrees. The nose rose and the flaps are retracted for a go-around. This was by no means by the books. With the engines at toga or takeoff/go-around power, the plane accelerated quickly. Then the first hint of trouble. A flaps overspeed warning comes on. They were flying too fast for the configuration that the airplane was in at that time. The first officer exclaims, "Speed over limit," and then the captain instinctively retracts the flaps. The plane eventually reaches an altitude of 1058 feet, and the captain pushes the side stick forward. A fatal mistake. The nose begins to drop. They are seconds away from hitting the ocean. The instruments show that the aircraft is pitching down at a dangerous angle. Whether the captain saw these or if he disregarded these warnings altogether will never be known. No one said a word. I don't know if they were focusing on fixing the flap issue or if they had been lulled into a false sense of security, but the silence was broken by a computerized warning. Sink rate only sounds when the airplane is descending too rapidly. Another voice chimes in. This one tells the pilots that they're dangerously close to the ground. Pilots are taught to pull up and gain altitude whenever they hear this alarm. But this captain did none of those things until it was too late. Eventually, the captain did pull back on the stick, but it was too little, too late. The plane slammed into the sea off of the coast of Bahrain. There were no survivors. A subsequent investigation revealed that the captain experienced something called a somatographic illusion. In this illusion, the absence of visual cues combined with rapid forward acceleration creates a powerful pitch-up sensation. This explains why the captain pushed the nose over. He believed they were pitching up when they were not. The report also highlights that the captain may have been overloaded with information. All in all, 143 lives were lost. In the aftermath of the accident, standard operating procedures and crew resource management was emphasized on during pilot training. The lessons learned from Gulf Air 072 did make flying safer.